Turn with me in your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 4 as we continue our study there. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. If you've been following along, you understand the context that Solomon is examining life and looking for significance. It's a search for significance. Where do we find significance? Everybody wants to feel significant. Solomon, in his study, looks at all the things that humankind has looked to for significance and found them to be meaningless. All is meaningless. If you didn't hear my introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes, it's online and you may want to go back and listen to that, okay, and just be reminded of the foundation upon which we have built this study. But do you ever feel like life just isn't fair? You ever feel like everything is against you? Everyone is against you. All of eternity, all of the universe, everything seems to have waged war against you. It is winning and you are losing. Whether it's your finances and how quickly they disappear, maybe it's your job and how quickly it can disappear. Maybe it's your health and how quickly it can disappear. Everything. Sometimes it just seems like, is there any fairness anywhere? One of my favorite children's books, Alexander. You know that book? Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. I have like 3 favorite children's books, and that's one of the top 3, okay? The Giving Tree is another one, and the Velveteen Rabbit is another one. But Alexander sometimes really represents how I feel. Listen to the book. I went to sleep with gum in my mouth, and now there's gum in my hair. And when I got up out of bed this morning, I tripped on the skateboard, and by mistake, I dropped my sweater in the sink while the water was running, and I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At breakfast, Anthony got a Corvette Stingray car in his breakfast cereal box. Nick got a junior undercover agent ring in his breakfast cereal box. I got cereal in my cereal box. I think I'll move to Australia. Then there was the carpool. Philip and Albert and Paul got a seat by the window. I screamed, I'm being scrunched, I'm being smashed. If I don't get a seat by the window, I'm going to be car sick. No one even answered. I could feel that it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At school, my teacher, Mrs. Dickens, said, Alexander, I think Paul's picture of the sailboat is much nicer than your picture of the invisible castle. At singing time, you sang too loud, and at counting time, you left out 16. Who needs 16? I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I could tell because Paul was acting rotten. He said, Alexander, you aren't my best friend anymore. Philip Baker is my best friend, and Albert Mayo is my next best friend, and you're only my third best friend. I hope he sits on a tack. I hope the next time he gets a double-decker strawberry ice cream cone, the ice cream part falls off the cone part and lands someplace, maybe in Australia. Things were even worse at lunchtime. Philip got 2 cupcakes for lunch. Albert got a Hershey bar with almonds for dessert. Paul got a jelly roll with little coconut sprinkles on it. My mother forgot to put in dessert. Oh, this is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. After school, Mom took us to the dentist, and Dr. Fields found a cavity in just me. Dr. Fields said, come back next week and I'll fix it. Next week, I'm going to Australia. On the way downstairs, the elevator door closed on my foot while we were waiting for Mom to get to the car. Anthony made me fall where it was muddy, and then I started crying because of the mud, and Nick called me a crybaby. And to make matters worse, my mom came back with the car and scolded me for being muddy and fighting. I'm having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. We went to the shoe store to buy some sneakers. Anthony got white ones with blue stripes. Nick got red ones with white stripes. I wanted blue ones with red stripes, but the shoe man said, sorry, Alexander, we're all sold out. They made me buy some plain old white ones, but they can't make me wear them. Then we went to pick up my dad at his office. Dad said, don't play with the copy machine. I forgot. Dad said, don't fool around with that phone. I think I called Australia. Dad said, please don't pick me up anymore. It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. We had lima beans for supper. I hate lima beans. There was kissing on TV. I hate kissing. My bath was too hot. I got soap in my eyes. My favorite marble went down the drain, and I had to wear my railroad train pajamas. I hate my railroad train pajamas. Alexander took my pillow. The Mickey Mouse light burned out. The cat doesn't want to sleep with me. He wants to sleep with Anthony. It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. My mom says some days are like that, even in Australia. Have you had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day? Well, that's how Solomon felt as Solomon went looking for significance everywhere he looked. It just seemed like life wasn't fair. Everyone was out to get him. Everyone was out to get everyone. And it was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad life. Meaningless, meaningless. All is meaningless under the sun, so says Solomon. Would you stand together with me? And let's read Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 1 through 12. Again, I looked, and I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. I declared that the dead who had always died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And I saw all the labor and all the achievements spring from man's envy of his neighbor, and this too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. And again I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil. Yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one because they have good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. And if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be empowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to take warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. May God bless the word. You may be seated. So Solomon is looking around him, and he's visiting different places, looking for significance and looking to see what mankind is like. And in our chapter, the very first place that he goes is to the courtroom. And as he goes to the courtroom, he discovers, at a place that you would think would be fair and just, he discovers exactly the opposite. He discovers in the courtroom a place that is supposed to, in Jewish law, follow Old Testament scriptures, the law of Moses, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Their law is based on the law of Moses, that there would be fairness to all, equally, that come into the courtroom. But Solomon discovers that that's not the case. So he goes into the courtroom to watch a trial, and he sees innocent people being oppressed by power-hungry officials. He discovers, in fact, in court that there are the wealthy that can afford the lawyer that gets them off the hook, and then there are the people that just are subject to whatever the whims of the court is, and the powerful, and they're subject to that, very much like we often feel in our own day. Victims wept, according to Solomon. But their tears did no good because nobody stood to comfort them. Nobody stood to help them. No one came and put their arm around them and walked with them through the process. And the oppressors were the powerful ones. They were the ones that had all the strength. They were the ones that had all the say. They were the ones that had all the authority. And most of the people were just subject to the whims of the oppressors. So Solomon witnessed 3 tragedies. Now, I want you to understand, because when we read through the book of Ecclesiastes, and this goes back to my introduction of the book, We have to understand that 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon uses the phrase under the sun. He is looking at life on earth in a broken, sinful, depraved world. And he has his sights set beyond the sun in a world that is to come. A God that is mighty and powerful, all-loving, all-knowing. A God who is kind and compassionate and caring, and a home that is yet to come. But here on this earth, Solomon says there are going to be all kinds of problems and all kinds of discomforts and all kinds of issues, and they will come your way. Trouble strikes us all. No one lives trouble-free. No one lives problem-free. No one lives where everything falls into place all of the time. As a matter of fact, we kind of have that superstition that bad news always comes in threes. The problem is that when the three ends, there's another three, and when that three ends, there's another three, and on and on and on, okay? And that's what Solomon is witnessing. Oppression and exploitation in the halls of justice. Pain and sorrow in the lives of innocent people. Joy and I are good people. Well, Joy is. And we went on vacation, as you know, and we had a great time. But it wasn't a problem-free time. We have a motorcycle trailer, and a weld broke on our trailer, and so we had to get it welded, and we pulled into clearly a southern welding shop. And the guy came out, and he looked at my trailer, and now this is a quote, "Something ain't right there." I never did learn what was wrong, but I did learn something ain't right, okay? And it still ain't right, but hopefully before our next trip it will be, okay? Bad things happen to good people. Unfortunately, that's the way of life. Solomon discovered unconcern on the part of those who could have brought comfort. Those who were powerful, those who were rich, those who were wealthy, those who had authority, those who could make a difference, didn't. And Solomon witnessed that. So devastating for Solomon that Solomon concludes, it's better to be dead than alive and oppressed. That seems like such a fatalistic decision or conclusion, doesn't it? It's better to be dead than alive and oppressed. In fact, Solomon says it would have been better never to have been born at all, because then at least, we would never know how bad things were. Now, Solomon is talking about life under the sun, and if that's all there is, then it's bad news. If that's all there is to life, then there's no hope. If all I have is this life and a broken motorcycle trailer, then something ain't right. But God has promised me more, and that's the direction that Solomon is going. If you remember 3 weeks ago when last I preached, Solomon said, God has made everything beautiful in his time. He has set eternity in the hearts of men. So wonderful, they can't even fathom how wonderful, how great, how glorious it is. So don't confuse the conclusions that Solomon is drawing here with Solomon's final conclusion. He's saying man without God is hopeless. Man without God is helpless. Man whose only focus are things of the earth, the lower things, and not the things above, is a man who has no hope and he has no future. So don't you wonder, Solomon was king, and he goes into the courtroom, and in the courtroom he discovers that things aren't good. Why didn't Solomon do something about it, okay? Why didn't he change it? Why didn't he make it better? Solomon discovered what many discover today. The system is too big. The system is too broken. Folks, I would like it if my president would just come along and right every wrong in America. And he can't. He can't. It's bigger than President Obama. It's bigger than any president we have ever had. It was bigger than George Washington in his day. because it's a fallen, broken world in which we live, and life isn't fair under the sun. So Solomon left the courtroom of verses 1 through 3, and he went into the marketplace. And in the marketplace, he discovered 4 men. He observed 4 different kinds of men. You see, he was disgusted by what he saw in the courts. And so he went down to the marketplace to watch laborers at work. Work is good. Most of us have jobs. Most of us make money. We feel good about our job. We feel good about what we do. We feel good when we come home because we've accomplished something. Work is good. And so Solomon thought, okay, the courts aren't so hot, but I'm going to go down and I'm going to watch good people doing hard work. And that's going to really lift my spirits and help me feel a lot better. And he saw 4 men. First of all, he saw the industrious man, and then he saw the idle man. Then he saw the integrated man, and then finally the independent man. Now let me show you these 4 guys, okay? First of all, the industrious man. The industrious man, Solomon discovered, is motivated by competition. Verse 4, and I saw all the labor and all the achievements spring from man's envy for his neighbor. This too is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. He thought hard work is going to be good. I'm going to watch a guy that's really working hard, and I'm going to be uplifted. And then he went and he saw that there was all kinds of easy examples of hardworking people, people that were busy, people skilled, people competent in their trade, masters of their trade. But rather than lifting his spirit, he looked a little bit further and he said, okay, so much for their hands, but what about their heart? Where's their heart? What's driving their heart? What's the motivation of their heart? What's inside of them? And he discovered that the motive of man was just to be better than the other guy. Just to be better than the other guy. Just to have more. To have a bigger house. My neighbor buys a 2,000 square foot house, so I buy a 2,500 square foot house, and then somebody comes in and buys a 3,000 square foot house, and so I got to get a 4. And my neighbor buys a really nice Toyota, and so I go out and I buy a really nice Cadillac, and then my neighbor comes along with a Lexus, so I need a Rolls. Competition to just be better than the next guy. That's what he saw in the marketplace, and he said people that are driven by competition, there's no end to it. It's an endless cycle. It's a hopeless cycle. There's not significance in it. You're not finding your significance in that. In fact, you're falling deeper and deeper and deeper into your insignificance because somebody always has more. Somebody always has better. Somebody always has bigger. Somebody always has faster. Somebody always has brighter and shinier. And so you're left working harder, making more, so you can beat your neighbor, the industrious man. He looks further and then he sees an idle man. This man is just lazy and he wants something for nothing. He's exactly the opposite. He doesn't want to work at all. He wants you to work. And then to share the wealth. Pass it around. See, I want Dylan to work really hard. Yeah. And I'm just going to kick back on my motorcycle, Dylan. And bring some money over and some food, okay? And mow my lawn and okay. Take care of me in my old age. The idle man doesn't want to work, doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to put out effort, wants everybody else to do that, and he wants to be the beneficiary. So we go from one extreme to the next. From a man who is industrious because he's competing with everybody to a man who has no ambition at all, is just lazy. Solomon, if you read Solomon's writings, especially in the book of Proverbs, you'll discover that repeatedly throughout the book of Proverbs, Solomon has no sympathy for lazy people. My mom was a great fan of Solomon. I've told you that I learned my love of the Old Testament because my mom was a scholar of the Old Testament. She read it never ceasing and often talked about Solomon. She loved to study Solomon. My mom believed that hard work kept you out of trouble. And she had a long list of hard work things for my sister and I to do that definitely kept us out of most trouble. Solomon wrote, "A lazy man is like the twin brother of the one who destroys." You have a destroyer, a ruthless conqueror that just goes out and burns and destroys everything in his presence, and that's the way a lazy man is. He's destroying everything that he sees, everything that he touches, everything that he comes in contact with. Solomon's conclusion after watching the lazy man is he's a fool, for he designs his own ruin. I'm going to show you a video. We don't have to turn the lights down. When I was on vacation, maybe you saw this on the news as well. It was the perfect example of a lazy man. My mom used to quote 2 Thessalonians 3:10, "If you don't work, you don't eat." And boy, did I learn to work, okay? But my mom was a real believer in that, okay? You earn your way, you work hard. And so was my dad. It was kind of how I was raised. Maybe you saw this on the news.
Meet Jason Greenslade, food stamp recipient.
Another day in the life of Jason, living it rat life.
We caught up with Greenslade in La Jolla, California, close to where he grew up. The 29-year-old has chosen the life of a beach bum in this seaside paradise. With no fixed address, Jason has, for the last couple of years, floated from place to place, staying with family, pals, and girls he's dated.
This is a nice day today, though, huh?
He gets by with a little help from his friends and you, the taxpayer.
My EBT SNAP card. It's got the coast of California on it.
So how do you get a SNAP card?
Just go out to the Human Resource Office, have your birth certificate, your Social Security card. I don't got a paycheck coming in, so I qualify. That's that.
And how often do you have to do that? Is it every month, every 6 months?
They got it now. It's where you only do it once a year.
So you fill out a form for a SNAP card, they give you that for a year, no questions asked.
Yeah, you're good to go. You're golden.
It's $200 a month, right?
Yeah, $200. Free money. Radical. Why not? This is my job right here to make sure everything's rolling smoothly.
So it's off to the gourmet section of the local food mart.
I got my rainbow roll. We got ahi, salmon, eel, yellowtail with rice and avocado. And then they had lobster on special. We got lobster and coconut water, $200 a month, and you just go like, boom.
Thank you for shopping with us.
Just like that.
Please remove your bag.
All paid for by our wonderful tax dollars.
Is it safe to say that this notion of holding down a steady job just is something that is not in your wheelhouse?
That's not the direction I'm going right now.
That's just not something that appeals to you, though?
Not whatsoever.
I have to say, I didn't really know what to expect when I sat down with Jason. I was really taken aback that he seemed completely unembarrassed about sponging off the rest of us in this manner. This was a guy who struck me as capable of pulling his own weight, as resourceful, even intelligent, and went to San Diego State for a while, and then to a technical school where he trained to become a recording engineer. But then he realized what he really wanted in life.
Scared? For sure. One of you guys are. EBT lobster. Does anybody want a piece? Nope. Yeah. No. This is my job right here to make sure everything's rolling smoothly. Make sure the sun's up and the girls are out. It's wonderful, man. Just get away from everything, clear your head. Just get out with the boys and have a good time. Living the life, never a dull moment. Another day in paradise.
So that's the kind of guy that really burned Solomon's biscuits. Now, I want you to understand, I'm not anti-food stamps. That's not the message here. I have been on food stamps. Some of you have been on food stamps. Maybe some of you are on food stamps. I pay my tax dollars today to help people in need. Solomon talks about the idle man, the lazy man. This guy is educated. He's able, and he's unwilling. He wants something for nothing. And Solomon says, the fool folds his hands and ruins himself. So the second kind of guy that Solomon saw was the idle man, the man unwilling to help himself. The third kind of guy was the integrated man, and this one is kind of a balance and a good person. The balanced man, okay? He is productive, yet careful to enjoy tranquility. Look at the verse. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and a chasing after the wind. So what Solomon does discover is that there's a good kind of guy. There's a good kind of guy, and there's the guy that understands the balance between being industrious, but not necessarily happening to be better than everybody, and then taking peace times, tranquil times, to kind of kick back and relax and enjoy life. Better one hand with tranquility than two hands filled with toil. And after comparing the workaholic to the lazy man, Solomon concludes that the best life is the balanced life, the person that finds the middle ground. I like to work hard. I like to do a lot of stuff. I like to accomplish a lot of things. But sometimes I like to go on vacation. That's the Ozarks. That's where we were. See that road? That's a motorcycle road right there, okay? You see what's there? Nothing. Nothing. We just rode down the road and enjoyed the nothingness, but the wonder, the awesomeness of God's creation. And there needs to be a balance between the industrious and the tranquil, not the lazy, but the industrious and the tranquil. And that was the third man that Solomon saw. And then the fourth man that he saw was the independent man. And unfortunately, an awful lot of people fit into this. And I'm using the word man just because it's the gender that's used here, but it's not in reference to men, it's in reference to people. But sometimes I think this fourth man is in reference to men more than women. Look at verse 7. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He didn't have a son, he didn't have a brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? But he kept on toiling and kept on depriving himself. And Solomon said, this too is meaningless. It's a miserable business. You see, this man is different from the industrious man because this man doesn't think he needs friends and he doesn't need help. And he doesn't want to share with anybody. He wants everything for himself. He's a greedy man, and he has no time to enjoy what he makes. He works hard. He gets rich. He gets up the next day. He works harder, and he gets richer. And he gets up the next day and works harder yet and gets richer yet and then dies. And never enjoys the life that God created. You see, Solomon, I told you 7 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon comes to a conclusion. And we look at it, and when we look at it, sometimes it looks fatalistic to us. It's not. Solomon is saying a very important thing is enjoy life that God created. Eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow you might die. Enjoy the life that God gave you today. This man can't enjoy it because he wants more and more and more. And Solomon concludes this is meaningless. It's a miserable business. You see, in the marketplace, I want you to understand, labor isn't bad. Hard work isn't bad. God wants us to labor. In fact, the very first man that God created, he put him to work in the garden, didn't he? Work is good. Labor with the right spirit and with the right reasons. Blessed are those who find balance in their lives. 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do, it says in 1 Corinthians, it says whatever you do, whether you eat or whether you drink or whatever you do all for the glory of God. Do all for the glory of God. All of life is an opportunity to worship God. I don't care what your job is. I don't care who you rub shoulders with. I don't care what you do, where you go. All of life is an opportunity to worship God, to do everything for God's glory. Ministering one to another in a secular job is an opportunity to bring glory to God. Look at everything that you do as an opportunity to worship Him. Well, then there's an interesting thing, because Solomon, then first he went to the courtroom And then he went to the marketplace, and now he goes to the highway. And I'm just going to, this is a freebie, this is a sidebar. There's a couple of things I want you to notice on your own as you're studying chapter 4 in Ecclesiastes. The number one thing is 4 times Solomon says, better. There's 4 betters. In your time this afternoon, if you want to go back and look at this chapter, take a look at the 4 things that he says are better. The second thing that I want to point out to you is that this next section, if you look at verses 10, 11, and 12, there's a progression. In verse 10, he says, if 1 falls down. In verse 11, if 2 lie down. And verse 12, 3 strands. There's a 1, 2, 3. There's a progression that is there that's very, very important. Solomon's experience with the independent man, the man who was friendless, the man that said, I don't have any friends. His experience with that man caused him to consider friendship and the wonder and the glory of doing things together. Do you know why we have a church? And I don't mean Fellowship Bible Church. I mean the church of Jesus Christ. We need each other. We need one another. Do you know why we have small groups? We need one another. You know why we develop friendships? Why we have Thursday morning men's Bible study or Tuesday, whenever they are, women's Bible studies? We need to be together. We need interaction with God's people. We need friendship. We need to develop one another. We need to pray one for another. We need to care for one another and be cared for. To know that we are loved and that we love. And so as Solomon thought about the independent man, I don't need anybody, Solomon realized, yes, we do. Yes, we do. And so it's interesting that he looks at 4 different aspects: working, walking, warming, and watching. Working, walking, warming, and watching. And how important every part of life is to interact with another person. Working. The biggest part of life. The biggest part of life is our work. Now I'm not saying the most important part of life. But what I'm talking about is we tend to spend more hours at work than we spend hours at doing anything else. I spend a whole lot more time at work than I do mowing my lawn, okay? Working, the biggest part of life. 2 workers get more done and have a better return for their work. It's hard to work alone. And it's hard to stay motivated when you work alone. But working together with someone can make such a big difference. The years I was raising my boys up in Alaska, we would go out in the woods and cut our firewood so it could stay warm in the winter. I'm here to tell you that running a chainsaw and splitting wood by hand alone is a very tedious job. But when I had 4 boys, and when we get out there and we're running the chainsaw and we're splitting wood and we're carrying wood and we're loading it and hauling it home and stacking it, we're doing it together and we're talking and when we're interacting, the next thing several hours has gone by and it seems like no time at all. Interaction. 2 get more done. Working together. Walking together. Was dangerous walking in Solomon's day. And he says, if 1 falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. When we were on vacation, we visited a couple of Civil War battlefields on what was called the Wire Road in southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, northwestern Arkansas. The Wire Road is still there. The original road that was the road that went from Springfield, Missouri to Fort Smith, Arkansas is still there. Just like it was back in the day. Can't drive a car down that road. Not easy pulling a horse and a cannon. Not easy pulling a wagon loaded with anything. Very narrow, very treacherous. And in Solomon's day, not only was it a problem with the roads being narrow and treacherous and hilly, steep, and easy to fall, but bandits were hiding out all over the place. And so it was better, always better for 2 to walk instead of 1, because it was safer and it was more enjoyable. And how much that applies even to our spiritual walk, folks. It's hard to walk spiritually alone. God hasn't called his children to be spiritual hermits. He's called us to care for one another, to pray together, to grow together, to minister one to another, to walk spiritually together. And then the third thing here is the warming. The most fragile time of life. Cold and old. You know, when I read this, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? That thought to me is when I crawl into bed at night and I snuggle up to my wife, and the two of us can keep each other warm. But probably in Solomon's day, what Solomon was actually in reference to was an old person who couldn't stay warm. Their circulatory system was broken down. It was hard for them to find warmth with no matter how many blankets. And if you read back in the life of David, when David was old and dying, they found servants that would lay in bed with him to help keep him warm. But it's talking about the very fragile times in life, times when we are cold, but times when we are old, and we need the presence of others to help us at those times. And then there's the watching time, the most vulnerable times of our life. And it says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, and a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. Oftentimes we spiritualize that. And we talk about marriage is best when it is man, woman, and God, okay? But actually Solomon is saying one friend is good, two friends are even better. To watch out for each other, to be on guard. And I'm not discounting the man, woman, and God. I'm all for that, okay? That's where a healthy marriage comes from. But the context here is two are good and three are even better in watching the enemy, in being on guard against the dangers. Three are best and more. He's not cutting it short at three. But on the highway says there's a lot of unfairness, there's a lot of injustice, there's a lot of dangers. And we need each other. We need involvement. I got to tell you, men, if you go through your week and you're not rubbing shoulders with other godly men, you're living in a dangerous place. You need to be together with other men. We have 4 different men's groups going on every single week. 2 on Thursdays, 3 on Thursdays. 2 Thursday morning, 1 Thursday night, 1 Saturday morning. Women, all kinds of opportunities in our church youth. All kinds of opportunities with Dylan. And I even see Dylan sometimes meeting 1-on-1 and 1-on-2 and 1-on-3. And as the need arises, to allow people to be together, kids, young people, youth, to be together. We have a college class upstairs. We have a class that's in here. We have a prayer group that's back in my office. People praying for me, praying for you, praying for us that need more people. There's plenty of room in there, okay, on Sunday mornings for the prayer team to grow bigger. We need each other. We need involvement. We need friends. And when we set that aside, we place ourselves in such a dangerous place in an unfair world. And so finally, Solomon goes home. And remember that Solomon had, I'm just going to call them 1,000 wives. Concubines and wives totaled up 1,000. And in his day, you tended to accumulate wives because of peace treaties. And in Solomon's day, he had peace with all the nations around him. Apparently 1,000 of them. And as part of that peace treaty, oftentimes a bride was given. These brides, generally speaking, had no right to an inheritance or anything, but they were well taken care of. So Solomon went back to the palace, and no doubt at the palace he heard stories of events going on in countries around him. And what looks like a parable is probably a story that Solomon heard and he's repeating. And it's the story of an old king. At one time when he was younger, he listened to his advisors, but then he got old. And in his elderly years, he turned away from his advisors and decided that he knew everything and became imprisoned in his stupidity, and they rejected him. And then a young king came along. And Solomon says maybe he was in prison, maybe he got out and became popular, maybe he rose to fame some other way, and all the people cheer him on. And they want the old king out and they want the new king in, and then they bring in the new king and he sets up his advisors and he listens to them, and then you know what happens? One day he becomes an old king. And the cycle continues. And all of a sudden he decides he doesn't need to listen to his advisors anymore, that he knows everything, he's got all this experience, and he turns away from them, and he becomes imprisoned in his stupidity. And the cycle goes on. And Solomon says that wealth and position are no guarantee of success. The fact that I'm the king doesn't mean I'm going to be successful. The fact that I'm the pastor doesn't mean that I'm going to be successful. The fact that I'm the president of an organization doesn't mean that I'm going to be successful. Position and wealth are no guarantee of success, and poverty and failure are no barriers to achievement. The guy was in prison, and then he becomes king of the land. He says, even in the palace, life isn't always fair. Life doesn't always turn out the way we think it should or wish it would. Chapter 3 and chapter 4 are part of one single thought. I don't know if you remember 3 weeks ago, but I told you that Solomon sees 3 things, no, really 4, but the 4th one I can't get to today. It's because we got to it today instead of 3 weeks ago. He began with, look up. Look up. God's in control. I'm going to tell you that I live in an unfair world. I'm a good guy. I'm a nice guy. I'm a Christian man. I pray. I read my Bible. I love the Lord. And I still get sick. And my car still breaks down. And I still drop my glasses and walk on them. And all kinds of bad things and unfair things still happen. Life is life. Solomon says, look up. God's in control. Look above the earth. Under the sun, life on earth, man is not fair. Life is not fair. But God has something bigger, something greater. I've told you this before. I've repeated this verse from Colossians. Paul says, set your affection on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. We need to look beyond. And when life isn't fair, and we just feel like, doesn't God care? Yes, he does. And God has planned something for you so great that Solomon says, I can't even describe it to you. Look up. Look within. That was the next thing that we saw. Man is made for eternity, and God has made all things beautiful for us to enjoy. God wants us to enjoy life here, but God wants us to prepare for life there. And then look ahead, because death is coming to all. And one day we will all be held accountable. And one day we will all stand before him. And one day, God will welcome those who have set their affection on him and recognize the completed work of Jesus on the cross. He will welcome those into his eternal heaven that he has created for our joy, for our everlasting peace. And then look around. Yeah, look around. Life isn't always fair. Life isn't always easy. Life isn't always good. But it doesn't mean that God isn't in control, that God hasn't created all things beautifully, and that God hasn't prepared an eternal home for us. So I'm going to give you 2 things in a final conclusion. I think this is my second conclusion. Number 1, we need one another. 2 are better than 1, and a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. You know, a week ago, my wife lost her vision. Just suddenly went blind in one eye. Happened in 24 hours. 24 hours. I'm going to tell you right now. I was scared. My wife is a good person. That's not fair. Bad things should happen to bad people. Good things should happen to good people. And I'm also going to tell you that the very first thing that popped out, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe the best is always going to happen. I thought she had a brain tumor. I mean, that's what popped into my mind. I even said that to her, and she said, oh, no. I bet you believed it too. Appreciate the encouragement, though, Joy. First thing I did, I sent you an email. I needed to know Randy was praying for me. Because as optimistic as I am, I couldn't do that alone. I couldn't do it alone. And Randy fired back an email and said if there's anything I can do and anything, and it was just enough for me to know that I didn't stand alone. If you're standing alone, it's a bad spot. It's a hard spot. And the second thing, we need balance. Better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. I love the New King James Version on that verse. Better a handful with quietness. One part of me has tranquility and quietness and peace and enjoys the smell of the rose and the sight of the mountains. And the other side of me works and labors and fulfills those responsibilities. Balance. Balance. I can't be balanced when I'm alone, and I can't be balanced when I'm single-focused. Solomon says if you want to find significance, then look to one another. Look to your relationships, and look to balance in your life. I'm going to challenge you today. How are your relationships? Do you need to be involved in an opportunity that we have here, or maybe opportunities that are elsewhere, with other godly men and women? If you're trying to wing it alone, it will only lead to despair and discouragement. Get involved. Get involved in a teaching ministry in the Ark. Get involved in a learning opportunity. Get involved with others. And secondly, if you're single-focused and single-driven, and you barely have time for the things of God, one day you're going to find that everything you lived your life for is gone in a puff of smoke. Meaningless, all is meaningless. God has a bigger plan for our lives.